It's just a month until the Beijing Winter Olympics. How is China preparing and what can we expect? Hello, I'm Einar and this is The Heat. The opening ceremony for the 2022 Winter Olympics is set to kick off on February 4th. This is said to be the greenest Olympic Games ever, as Beijing has incorporated elements of sustainability and reduced emissions at the event. However, there are concerns about the spread of the Omicron variant, which has already put one Chinese city in lockdown. CGTN's Dan Williams has details.
This time round, the eyes of the world will be on Beijing as China's capital becomes the first city to host both the Summer and Winter Olympics.
All 12 Olympic venues have been completed and are spread over 3 different clusters. Once again, the Games will take place amid the COVID-19 pandemic.
We can look forward to successful Games, but also to safe Olympic and Paralympic Winter Games, because also the preparations with regard to the anti-COVID measures are very well underway.
The US, Canada, UK and Australia all announced they would not send officials to attend the Games over claims of human rights abuses in Xinjiang. China denies the claims and says it will take resolute countermeasures. The UN General Assembly had urged all nations to observe an Olympic truce.
We can only accomplish this mission if the Olympic Games stand above and beyond all political, cultural and other differences.
Athletes around the world are now preparing for the Games. US 3-time gold medal winning snowboarder Shaun White told CGTN he believes Beijing will host a spectacular Olympics.
I'm so excited. I just know they're gonna bring it. They're gonna put on the best show. I'm so excited for the opening ceremony because I know what a colorful and exciting, beautiful culture they have. I'm sure it's going to be spectacular.
After a gap of less than 6 months, the stage is once again set for an Olympic Games. Dan Williams, CGTN, Copper Mountain, Colorado.
To discuss the Games and more, let's bring in our panel. Joining us from Montreal, Canada, Dick Pound is a long-time member of the International Olympic Committee. Out of Beijing, the rest of our panel, Einar Tangen is a political and economic affairs commentator, and Victor Gao is a chair professor at Soochow University. Welcome to all of you. And Victor Gao, let me start with you. These Games are being billed as the greenest ever. Of course, that sends a very powerful message in this era of climate change. But what makes this the greenest Games ever?
Thank you very much for having me. Happy New Year to start with. First of all, the new stadium facilities, etc., are all built according to the highest green standards in the architecture, the management, etc. That means that if you walk into the stadium or all these Winter Olympic sport facilities, they are green by design, by building, by materials, by the way they use electricity, etc. And all the materials provided for the consumption of the athletes, management, referees, etc., are all built upon this idea of green green development, green consumption, etc. Then, in terms of transportation, lots of the vehicles are green EV cars. Now, in this sense, I think this Winter Olympics in Beijing will showcase how societies can really achieve in terms of green development and using every material, bearing in mind that we need to cut down on the CO2 consumption or the footprint, etc. So this Beijing Winter Olympic, in addition to being a spectacular Olympic Games, I'm sure, will again showcase how green development can be promoted and how China and all the other countries can benefit if we very conscientiously follow this new green development standard.
But Victor, making these games clean and green has also come at some cost, hasn't it? I mean, for instance, Beijing is not known for its high precipitation. It does not have enough snow to hold the games like this, so it's in fact had to manufacture snow, and this process actually uses up quite a bit of electricity and water. What can you tell us about that?
Indeed. Actually, I spoke to some International Olympic Committee members before, and they actually suggested that in China, when we talk about snow and icy conditions, the first city come to mind is actually Harbin, way up in the north, very close to the Russian border. However, in terms of doing Winter Olympic city, for example, Beijing and its neighboring city like Zhangjiakou, etc., actually can be considered as very ideal cities. Beijing mostly for indoor events, for ice events, etc. In Zhangjiakou for snow events because it has wonderful mountains, especially mountain slopes. And then Beijing and Shijiazhuang, they built fast-trained injection and all the other transportation, so moving athletes and management people back and forth from these two cities to different facilities, stadiums, etc., is also relatively easy. So I think to host and then to organize such a Winter Olympic events will depend on many other factors, and I'm sure that the combination of these cities, one in Beijing, which will be the only city to host both the Winter as well as the Summer Olympics, and in Zhangjiakou, for example, will truly demonstrate that for cities like Beijing and Zhangjiakou, by combining their resources, we can overcome the difficulties and really showcase what Olympics truly is. The Beijing Olympics, allow me to add one point, belongs to mankind. It belongs to the Chinese people, but it also belongs to the American people and people of all the other countries. So let's really sit down and watch the wonderful spectacle of the Beijing Olympics to unite mankind rather than being divided by nothing else but a Winter Olympics.
Dick Pound, in terms of the events themselves, what are your expectations? And of course, as a former Olympian yourself, what is your message to the athletes just a month ahead of the start of the Games?
There are probably several we can give them. One is to assure them that the facilities are ready and that they are absolutely world class, that the events will be well organized, and that every athlete will have a chance to do his or her best on the occasion. And one of the reasons that we picked Beijing as the host city is that we know the organizational capacity of China, and we'd seen that in 2008. So we were entirely confident that everything would be ready in first class.
The one big thing, of course, that would be of concern, Dick, to the athletes will be the pandemic. Now, we know that China is going to implement what it calls a closed-loop bubble to make sure that the athletes and the officials who will be there will be isolated to lessen the chances of anyone getting infected. But to what extent will that be preoccupying the minds of the athletes as they make final preparations for the Games?
Well, you know, as it happens, even without a pandemic, Olympic athletes in the Olympic city are pretty much in a bubble already. And so this will be somewhat different. I think the key will be for the athletes to arrive healthy and get into the closed loop or the bubble. And once you're in there, I think the chances of becoming infected are very, very remote. So as we're coming into this last month, there are athletes training all over the world, and they're doing their best wherever they're training to make sure they don't contract the virus. And if you get into Beijing, I think you can be pretty confident that you're not going to be infected, and you won't infect anybody else.
Einar Tangen, the United States and some of its allies are staging what they've termed a diplomatic boycott. What kind of impact is that going to have on these Games?
Well, it doesn't have any impact in terms of the Games themselves. The athletes are coming. What it does, though, is it besmirches the tradition of the Olympic truce. I mean, the whole point was, these countries were able to get together even while they were at war. And this was a way of opening the door to remind people that we are first off human and that we can compete on the track and field and the slopes as opposed to trying to take our differences out in war. So this is antithetical. It's exact opposite of what is supposed to be happening. I just want to add 2 points. One, I want to reiterate the organizational capacity of China. They've had zero COVID response. It's been extremely successful. They protected their people while still maintaining the world's leading large economy. And in terms of the selection of events, just be aware that it was colder in these Olympic ski areas there than it was at the North Pole. So it's not a question of temperature. And at this juncture, with Alaska having the largest heat wave they've ever had, this idea that you can count on the weather to be predictable is not there. I mean, making snow is something that everyone does. They have made extreme efforts to make sure that all the power that is going to these events is in fact green.
Anna, just to get back to the diplomatic boycott, I mean, what does China make of it? Does it set a bad precedent? I mean, these boycotts have been used before. 1980 and 84 are two that come to mind immediately. In fact, if you look way beyond it, there were boycotts even during the Games in Athens.
Yes, I mean, it was basically the main city, Athens, was the one who said they were going to pull out not because of war, but because they were mad because one of their top competitors was accused of trying to bribe his opponent in order to win the event. So, as I said, this was not about war. It was not about the ability to have a truce. In this particular case, it was about politics, unfortunately, and that's exactly what we have today.
Victor Gar, what are your thoughts on this? I mean, the boycott, of course, does politicize the games, doesn't it? And there are those who are critical of the United States' action. Here's the Russian President Vladimir Putin. Let's listen to what he had to say.
Sport, as well as art, should unite people, not create problems in relations between people and states. When the sport is deprived of its fundamental value, the entire international community is undermined.
What do you make of that, Victor? Do you agree that it's going to be the sport itself and athletes who are going to pay the price?
Well, first of all, I feel very sorry for those countries which engaged in the so-called diplomatic boycott of the Beijing Winter Olympics. First of all, as I mentioned, the Beijing Olympics belong to mankind, including to the British people, the American people, to the Australians, the Canadians, you name it. Now, secondly, in the world of today, you do not need to be physically in Beijing or in Zhangjiakou to watch the games. I'm pretty sure those politicians who decide to boycott the Beijing Olympics will watch the Beijing Olympics at home, in their offices, on their computers, etc. And I will be shocked if they do not cheer for the American athletes or other countries' athletes when they win medal at the Beijing Olympics. So it is really hypocrisy. Now, further, to do the diplomatic boycott of the Beijing Olympics is really nonsensical. As President Macron of France said, you either directly boycott the Olympics or you don't diplomatically boycott the Olympics, because diplomatic boycott of the Olympics is tantamount to launch a hunger strike after dinner until breakfast. It really does not serve any purpose. Now, then, on a more higher level, to link their so-called diplomatic boycott of the Beijing Olympics to the situation in Xinjiang is completely absurd. Xinjiang is doing a very, very excellent and solid job in terms of dealing with extremism and separatism and terrorism. I think many other countries can learn from the Chinese experience of how to deal with the root causes of terrorism in Xinjiang. Xinjiang enjoys stability. You can go to Xinjiang without looking over your shoulder to worry about someone coming up to snatch on a neck, for example. This is truly confounding the black and white and confounding the truth, for example. from the Chinese perspective, this is truly a vilification against China. It's an insult to the Chinese people. And also, ironically, it's an insult to those American athletes, Canadian athletes, and Australian athletes, you name it, who will come. And I do hope they will compete in a very excellent manner. And I can assure you, the American politicians, etc., they will watch the games and they will cheer for their athletes and athletes of other countries when they achieve excellence and win medals. Thank you.
Okay, we are going to take a break right now. More of our conversation about the 2022 Winter Olympics. Stay with us. You're watching The Heat.
The nature of business is to bring value. Business activities in Europe, Asia, and the US reach consumers globally. Trade, manufacturing, energy, high-tech, real estate, consumption. We give an expanded view on global business and how it covers, influences, or relates to the whole world. Global Business, only on CGTN. To know about China. China 24, only on CGTN.
Welcome back to The Heat. We're discussing the upcoming Beijing Winter Olympics, which is just a month away. Let's get back to our panel right now. Dick Pound, I just want to continue our conversation about that boycott. You know, the International Olympic Committee has always tried to keep sport and politics separate. In fact, it was summed up very nicely by the Deputy President of the South African Students' Congress, Buyile Matiwana, who summed it up when he said, "The Games are not meant to be platforms for political posturing and petty political chess." But I'm wondering how much of a diplomatic challenge it is for the IOC to stay above the fray.
Well, actually, you know, it's a little more subtle than perhaps has been described already, in the sense that for the first time, states that have some issues with the state of China are not using Olympic athletes as their soldiers in that particular dispute. They're very supportive of the Olympic Games and the athletes that are participating in them. The issues between states need to be resolved between the states themselves. And I think we're not going to make the same mistake that we did in the case of the Moscow boycott and the one that followed that in Los Angeles. So it's a very good separation. Now, governments are the principal actors in world politics. They have to regulate their relationships. And I think all that has happened here is that some states have signaled, listen, we have some issues that we need to discuss with China and hopefully to resolve them. But we're not going to spoil the games and spoil the once-in-a-lifetime experience of an Olympic athlete. So I think that's progress of a considerable sort on the Olympic front.
Einar, let's move on to the preparations for the Games themselves right now. You are in Beijing, of course, and what are you seeing in the city?
Well, I mean, the activity it's not a sudden rush. There's no, it's not like other places where they're trying to figure out whether they're going to finish. Everything is in place. Everything has been tested. People here have not really, fully embraced it yet. I think there's some concerns about a little bit on the economy and things like that, but you're starting to see a lot of things on television, very well done ads. People are now slowly coming around to this idea that the Olympics are here and they intend to enjoy them. I mean, the Winter Olympics sports themselves are not a natural for China. They're not, only in the very northern parts do they do a lot of skiing and ice skating, snowboarding and all of these things. But they are really looking forward to this, and I think you're going to find a very, very positive reaction by the Chinese people. Unfortunately, it's going to be very limited. The rumor is that only about 30,000 people will be allowed into the stadiums for safety reasons, and but it will be televised, and I think people will be very excited.
Right, and Victor, what is your experience of what's going on in the city right now? Of course, these games are taking place in the midst of a pandemic. I mean, are you seeing that affect what's going on in the city at all?
Thank you very much. Actually, I live in Beijing, about 1 kilometer away from the seat of the Beijing Winter Olympics Organization Committee. So I can actually feel the excitement of organizing and preparing for the Beijing Olympics. Secondly, one of the drives for China to organize this Winter Olympics is exactly as Einar said, Winter Olympic sports items are not traditionally very big items in China. And China wants to make sure that by hosting the Winter Olympics, it will stimulate the interest among the Chinese people for these Winter Olympic sport items, especially snow and ice items, for example. And hopefully, it is expected that close about 300 million people in China will start to be interested and participate one way or another in these newly discovered sports items in China. This will be truly a big legacy for Olympic movements throughout the world, because by hosting one Winter Olympic game, you can arouse so many people's interest in this sport and then enable them and arouse their interest in participating in the Winter Olympics. This is, I think, exactly what Olympic spirit is all about. And let's really see the better side of the Beijing Olympics, and let's focus on the upside, and let's also eliminate all those evil and dirty and contaminated political scheming, for example, and let's leave them outside of the parameters of the Olympic competition. Focus on the positive side of what Olympic game, especially this Beijing Olympic Games, can do for all of us, for mankind as a whole.
Dick Pound, there will be thousands of athletes at the Games, as well as thousands of officials officiating and a limited number of spectators as well. But of course, these are not the first Games to be held during the era of the pandemic. We had the Games in Japan not so long ago. Were there any takeaways from the Japanese Games that will be put to use in Beijing?
Well, I think the experience with the bubble, getting people into the protected bubble, was very successful in Tokyo. It was certainly observed closely by the Beijing Organizing Committee, and I think that their concept will be even more secure than Tokyo was. So in that sense, the people who come will be, assuming they're healthy when they get there, they will remain healthy. They will have an opportunity to live in the bubble, and frankly, even without a pandemic, when you think of it, most Olympic athletes are in kind of a bubble when they get to the host city. They're focusing on their training. They're going from the Olympic Village to the practice or competition venues, and they're not out, in all of the restaurants and bars. So that's not going to change much. And I think that one other thing is probably no organizer would actually admit it in public, but if they could do without having to deal with all the spectators, they would be much happier organizers. And I think that in some sports, a crowd may help some athletes. In others, it's perhaps a distraction. And the fact of the matter is that historically, 99.5% of the people who experience the Olympic Games do it via television or some other digital platform. So that's not going to be particularly disruptive. And there'll be, as they say, 30,000 very, very lucky Chinese that'll have a chance to see some of the events live. But the world as a whole, the billions of people outside of China who will experience the Games, will do so on the extremely effective television signals produced by Olympic broadcasting.
Einar Tangen, organising games, of course, like these are very expensive. They're not for the faint of heart either. It's a huge undertaking. But if we look at the infrastructure for these games, in fact, for all games, if we look at the expense, but host cities do benefit, don't they, in the long term?
Well, I mean, you have to qualify that. I mean, it's not exactly clear. It really goes into how much planning you put into it. It's what are you going to do with the venues after they're done? I mean, do you really need that many? I mean, we've had issues in England and things like that. It certainly has become very, very much economically driven. But as I said, if you plan it out, if you know exactly what you're going to do with your venues, that really helps in Beijing's case, because they had these, these incredible facilities that they did for 2008. They can reuse those, so they're getting at least 2 uses out of them. But I mean, there was some concern about the bird's nest. It needed a little primping up, making it look fresh and new again in order to host it this time around. And the question is, how do you successfully use that after this Olympic Games?
Victor, of course, as you were saying, you live very close to the bird's nest, which is where the Summer Games were held in 2008. How did that change the city?
Well, I think the Beijing 2008 Summer Olympics really changed a lot for Beijing as well as for China, and also for the world's perception of China. So from the Chinese perspective, the 2008 Summer Olympics in Beijing was a complete success. It really pushed China in terms of modernization, engagement with the rest of the world, and higher standards, for example, and how sports can play a major role in our daily life to a higher level. Now, I'm pretty sure that the Beijing Winter Olympics will do even more than that. First of all, the Winter Olympic Games is new to China, and through this Winter Olympics, more and more Chinese people will come to love this Winter Olympic Games sports. Secondly, China will demonstrate to the world again that it is peaceful, it loves sports, it supports the International Olympic movement, right, and it does want to push the Winter Olympics game as well as Olympic Games as a whole to a higher standard.
Okay, and that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.